Hi, I'm Aidan Brown, and this is the main stage. Welcome to today's show. We're really glad to have an audience, and we have Niel Geyser here today. Niel is an expert in, I would say, a number of things, among others, performance psychology, specifically within the field of high-performance sports. He's definitely got a very immense depth of record on that. We can have a look at some of the fighters and athletes that he has coached over the years. But he also has a very unique insight, I would say, into hacking the human mind. He is an outstanding teacher, one of the best that I've ever had, I would say, tied second with Professor Morris Mtombeni from the Gordon Institute of Business Science. And the reason that I regard Niel so highly as a teacher and as an educator of sorts, and like him with somebody like Professor Morris Mtombeni, again, has to do with that hack of the human mind. He has an unbelievable way of condensing and distilling information into sound bites that the human mind is able to articulate and process under pressure, under the effects of anxiety, under the weight of a host of variables that might otherwise put pressure on a person, where they're not able to retrieve information at the right time, in the right order, to do the right thing. And when you have a look at some of the athletes that he's coached over the years, you can see that they have been able to pick up things from Niel that have been placed into their cognitive reading in just such a way that they're able to recall them when they need them, as they need them. And I've experienced this kind of teaching myself firsthand. And when you hear athletes like Dricus Du Plessis, Cameron Simon, DeMart Penner talk about his ability to coach, the same narrative comes up time and time again. So we've brought Niel in here today as an expert to talk about the hack of the human mind, to talk about trends in the combat sports industry in South Africa, to talk about coaching adults, coaching professionals, coaching business people, coaching children, for that matter of fact. And it is an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio here today, Niel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, we'll roll right into it. And the first one is just a casual. I kind of always start with this: is what motivated you to take up this kind of work? I seem to think, given your performance mindset and your overall cognitive abilities, that you would have been successful in almost anything that you wanted to do. What is it that made you want to dedicate your life and commit yourself to high performance or professional sports coaching?
I think I didn't start out with the idea that I wanted to be a performance coach necessarily. As a youngster, I always wanted to be a professional sportsman, and that's how I had a passion for achieving great things and see how far you can take it. Not be ordinary, not wanting to necessarily get pulled into living an ordinary life, the normal 8 to 5 type situation. Sports has always been a thing that I've found that I really enjoyed and found great value in. And I set out to be a professional sportsman. I started in tennis. I played tennis in America. Whilst I was there, I did a coaching course, and I qualified to a professional tennis coach. And that at the time was basically just to keep me there, and giving me the ability that I can try and play the tour and see how far I can go. But that was a dream. And at a certain point, I realized I was actually, I enjoyed it, and I was decent at coaching. And I spoke to my mom, and she said to me, "But you come from a family of teachers," which I didn't really at that point know about or know a lot about. And I think as I started working with people, I've got a absolute liking for people, and then obviously performance. And everything kind of progressed from there. As the sports that I played, from tennis, I started boxing. I found judo and jiu-jitsu, and I was like a perfect fit for me. It was a space where you have to apply yourself mentally, and the expression is physical. And it was just the culmination of all the attributes that I've been accumulating. Started, taking part and fighting, and again, very quickly found myself coaching, and everything just kind of, led up to a point where my jiu-jitsu and judo career was starting to get to an end, and MMA guys started asking me to get involved with coaching. At that stage, there was a gap on the ground specifically for the MMA. It was still very new in the country, and I started coaching again. And it's just, I don't know. It is a passion for me, but I found it later. But it wasn't something that I set out to necessarily. I thought I was going to become a coach. But now I can't see my life in any other way. I love helping people, leaving people better than what I found them. So that's where I am at the moment.
It's very interesting to hear you say that you came from a family of teachers, because it's something I've not realized. And it would be inexplicable for me to discount that spending so much time around teachers, watching people teach, watching people that maybe have an interest in it, a special interest in it, must have somehow rubbed off on you. I just can't imagine it any other way. I think that it's definitely impacted your personality somehow, and that is a trend that I've seen, for example, with Ben Winks, where he came from a family of people that really enjoyed community service, as an example, and in a sense, he's gone into that same sort of thing. So that's really interesting, how the family culture may have an impact on your empath skill set. Mm-hmm. When we talk about hacking the human mind, because I want to get back into this, I was wondering if there's some kind of insight that you can give us about how you arrived at the point where I call it this hacking of the human mind. And I'll begin to explain the first time that I saw this. And again, to go back to Professor Morris Mtombeni, he's the head of Gibbs Business School, Gordon Institute of Business Science. And we were in a lecture one day, and what people do in lectures is they're actually not listening to anyone around them. They're not engaged in the process. They sit there in their own world, and they wait for their opportunity to talk, and they have an idea in their head, and they quickly spring it forward, and they look clever for a moment. But the quality of the conversation and the quality of the thought in the room is actually very fragmented. It's kind of all over the place. And the first time somebody did that, he stood up and he said, you need to make a comment only in relation to the comment made before, not just your own idea in isolation. And in that moment, I realized that this guy had learned so much about teaching people that he had hacked the little safety space, the little false safety spaces that we create for our egos. And he shut that little space down. And I've seen you do the same thing in your coaching processes. And I would just like to find out if you can illuminate how you got down to the point where you're almost seeing a few steps ahead in the thought process of the athletes that you're coaching, or the business people that you're coaching, or whoever it might be.
I think it's an interesting question. I've always been able to see big picture and detail, and be able to vacillate between the two. And I've been fortunate. I have a mental mentor, Ian Janssen van Rensburg, who was my mental coach when I was fighting. Also a mental coach for Dricus and a bunch of other athletes in multiple sports. And him and I have a relationship where we bounce ideas, we build processes, we try and figure out mental processes, and we're fortunate that we can test it. So we test it in our daily lives, we test it with athletes, we test ourselves to a point where if it works, we keep it. If it doesn't, we discard it. But this has been a process that's been ongoing for many years, long before, probably since 2010, that we started working together like that. And it cultivated in a very interesting space right now, where I think the things that we're doing is leading edge. But a lot of it's based on simplicity. I think people overcomplicate the mind space and the use of it. I think there are much simpler solutions, but it comes down to understanding how everything fits together. The mental space, the physical expression, the physical space, the spiritual space, and how all three of those integrate. And that's been our main focus, is the integration of all of it. And I'm just fortunate that I have opportunities every day to be able to practice and bounce ideas off of guys around me that are intellectually really smart. I think simplicity is key. Simplifying, and then I always say people don't know what they don't know, and when you don't understand something, you tend to do things that are because you think you need to do something or whatever, and it's not always the right thing. As soon as you start forming a better understanding of what has to happen, what you're doing, how you work, all these little things that's counterproductive kind of falls away. But you need somebody that can view a bigger picture and a detailed picture to be able to discern what's important and not.
I definitely think that you have done well to also leverage community. You're talking about Ian, who's a mental and psychological coach. I've obviously also had the pleasure of meeting him. He's a fascinating human being. So you've done well also to keep the right kind of people in your circle, which is, I guess, one of the ideal qualities of a good coach. I absolutely love fighters. I've taken a very short swing at the industry myself, and I absolutely love them, but they can at times be kind of difficult and erratic people to work with. So you actually have done quite well to keep people in your community, to recognize the skills of people like Ian and be able to work with them extensively to fortify the overall processes of your coaching, and the results are definitely starting to show. There's no doubt now, especially in the last couple of months, that yourself and I would say Mornay Visser and potentially one or two other South Africans, guys like maybe Chris Bright as well, are no doubt the most premier combat coaches on the continent. Obviously, there's guys like Colin Nathan who do specifically boxing, also truly fantastic coaches. And South Africa needs to do just a little bit better to keep developing people like you, keep supporting people like you, or we're going to lose a lot of knowledge in the industry. You only need one person like you to retire out and not have coached up somebody on a pipeline behind you, and it's a huge loss of knowledge, because that knowledge can't be kept in an encyclopedia, in digital encyclopedia. Sports coaching, high performance sports coaching, specifically for MMA, which is very complex, requires a huge amount of complexity in the coaching system, is something that we certainly don't want to lose. But I would like to just move a little bit away now from the mental aspects of the coaching dynamics that you employ and that you have been able to see and understand over the years, and look specifically at biomechanical structure. So we move now from the mental to the physical, and you can maybe even speak about how those two marry together. But more specifically, you have a focus on biomechanical structures when you're coaching. I've seen that you use the same thought process with biomechanical structures for weightlifting, for kettlebells, for striking, for wrestling, for jiu-jitsu. And I think that this is one of the most fascinating things to come out of sports science, certainly in South Africa in the last couple of years. It's not something that I'm aware of. I have plenty of friends with master's degrees and PhDs in sports biomechanics and that sort of thing. And none of them are really aware of this. And I think it's unbelievable that you've been able to create a kind of universal system for this, to employ it with your professional fighters. And I believe Cameron Simon even spoke about it on his podcast fairly recently. Talk us through that. If there is a sports coach out there now, or a young MMA coach coming up, obviously don't give away all your secrets. We don't expect you to give away all your proprietary information. But if there's somebody out there, is there maybe something that you can say to illuminate this a little bit and explain why it's better for safety, injury prevention, for power delivery, for technical mobility and all that kind of thing?
I think I want to start right in the beginning, in terms of the mental and physical and how they're married together. I think everything starts in the mind. It starts mentally, a thought to an action, which is physical. So in the mental space, you have your skill set, your moves, your movements, and your skills come in is directing the movements, understanding which movements to do at which times. Then there's strategy and tactics that come into play, and that's all mental. And our expression of our mind and the mental is in the physical, is where I use my body to express what my strategy is, what my technique is going to be, and whatever. So I think that's where the mental side comes in. And oftentimes people talk about physicality and wanting to be physical, but they forget that physicality comes from a mental point first, before the physical action is done. Specifically, when you are cognitively aware, it's one thing if you in a flight and fight state where you have to react. But when you're playing a sport, when you're in a fight and you're controlling the mental space, you can control the outcome. So from a mental side, I feel everything's mental first. On the physical side, I looked at it from a standpoint of, if I move my body, every single person on earth has a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, a body that's universally similar and different in shapes and sizes and weights and all of that. But that doesn't change. How I use it, well, therein lies the key. So understanding if I use my body and stand alone, without any outside, call it pressures, or from maybe doing a joint sport or doing weightlifting or something like that, how do I handle my body? So you would look at things like yoga, you'd look at things like bodyweight exercises, you would look at Pilates and all of these types of things. And we understand that the body, just using a body as is, it can be flexible, it can be structurally sound and strong. When you go more into the bodyweight type of exercises, your pull-ups and calisthenics and those type of things. So there's certain rules in that to keep myself safe, but there's also certain rules I can break because I don't have outside factors like weights and so forth. That's putting load on my body and strain on my body. Then I go into a space where I say, okay, if I use my body standalone, that's one aspect, and I need to understand how to properly use my body, how to be mobile and strong and all that. Then when I start doing weights, certain rules apply. Tensions, structures that I need to keep whilst moving weights around so I don't injure myself. Everybody knows if I go to the gym, it can be amazing for me. I'll be able to get fit and strong and all these things. But if I do an exercise wrong, it can also potentially hurt me. We understand this. We employ a personal trainer or whatever to help us, or a coach or teacher to show us how to do this correctly. Then we get to fighting. So a weight essentially doesn't want to hurt you. It just is, and the way you manage it and the way that you move it will give you a certain benefit or effect. Then we get into a sport, a combat sport, or where like MMA, where you have or jiu-jitsu for that matter, where you have a partner or a opponent who's also a certain weight, but that weight has an intention and it has a very specific idea with you. So now all of a sudden, the same rules, because it's a weight, the person is a weight, the same rules that I apply in the gym should apply when I train with or fight against somebody else. And it will be like that in rugby and all of those sports as well. An outside factor with the weight, then I need to keep my structure the same as what I would do when I'm working with the weight standalone. But the dynamics of an outside force with an intention creates a different complexity. So if I look at the system, there's definitely 3 levels, and you need to start in the body standalone first, fix everything, then move on to the weighted weight training and all the rules and structures around that to keep your body safe. And those rules need to be applied in a dynamic space of sport or fighting or whatever it is that you want to do. So that's kind of how I set it out. I was unfortunate and maybe fortunate through my career to have a lot of injuries. And the way that sports were taught, and as far as I know, most sports are taught is on a technical level. But marrying the biomechanics and the conditioning with the sports, almost a standalone thing. And I've always been intrigued with why that is. Similar to the mind always being involved when I'm doing something physical, I believe that the physical attributes of strength and conditioning, all of that, should also be involved in my fighting at all times. And there's a disconnect there often. So what I try to do in my coaching and my philosophy is to marry all of this, to marry the mental and then the physical strength, conditioning, structures and postures, and marry that into the dynamic space of whatever sports that you want to play. And it's interesting how universal that is. If I play rugby, there's a certain structure that I need to hold, else I won't be able to scrum, for instance, or I'll hurt myself in a tackle or something like that. In fighting, exactly the same. But my injuries that I've had over the years have led me to go deeper into rehabilitation, understanding structures better, how to improve structure, 1, and 2, how to which structures in self-preservation and preserving my body to have longevity in life and in sport. What type of structures do I need to have and uphold, and how do I train for them? And then specifically, how do I train for them in the sports that I play? Because every sport's different, and the type of structure or posture that you need, or the amount of pressure that you would feel to try and keep those structures a little bit different. For instance, let's call it tennis. It's quite tough on the joints and the knees, and the type of conditioning and stability that I need for that would be a little bit different than fighting, and will be different for rugby and all the other sports. But that's kind of my thought process behind it, is marrying the mental, the physical, and then in the physical to get to that dynamic space where I play a sport or compete or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, you've created an amazing curriculum. That's essentially what it is. And if you were in academia, that's exactly what it would be. You would go and you would type your curriculum out, and it would be of substantive intellectual value. It still is of substantive intellectual value, but it's a different kind because it's not easily shared. You can't just pass this knowledge on in an email. I think that your curriculum would be easily adapted, for example, to professional rugby. Mm-hmm. And I think that there would be amazing opportunities in South Africa for professional rugby teams to look at this kind of thing, to understand what you've understood over time through MMA, through coaching, weightlifting, rugby, tennis, whatever else, to really look at the reduction of injuries in the sport. It's a huge thing that's coming forward in South Africa in the next 10, 15 years. The same way that America had its moment with head injuries in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, and they had to look at many things, medical lawsuits and changing the rules and safety and prevention. For me, that's coming in South Africa now. And I think that professional rugby teams would be at an absolute loss to not start looking at people like you and the knowledge that they have and to try and implement it in other environments. I don't know if you would necessarily be interested in that kind of thing.
Definitely.
But your curriculum's highly adaptable. It's not just for MMA. I mean, you could adapt it to golf. You could adapt it to almost anything. Very interesting that you've created this. And I hope to see more developments of it in the future. When we have a look at sports like MMA, there is an incredible amount that people learn from different levels of martial arts, even at the very lowest level. I always say all kids should do some kind of sports that they've lost a part of their childhood. If your child or grandchild or family member or whatever it is isn't participating in at least some level of sports, it builds social adaptability, it builds cognitive flexibility, it allows you to understand a host of different people and cultures, and there's absolutely no doubt that the benefits are there. I would like to find out, I'll give you one example, and then I'd like to find out if there's perhaps one or two other things that you've learned from watching professional sportsmen and how they are in all aspects of life. And one example is that when you have, for example, guys that are doing wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling all the time, I find that these people are very good at handling pressure, handling anxiety, and then reaching deep within themselves to find a solution to their own problems. It's a very common thing to find yourself in trouble and reach for the nearest branch and try and grab it, or reach for the nearest safety zone, somebody to kind of try and take your troubles away. Very unproductive thought process, that a very unproductive performance psychology or aspect of performance psychology that. And with martial artists, I find these guys can focus through the noise, they can focus through the challenges a little bit. Even a professional golfer does the same thing. They've trained themselves to hit a perfect moment in a little bubble of pressure. And those people just do really, really well often in life. And I would like to know if there's one or two other insights. Perhaps there is somebody out there and they have trouble dealing with the world, or maybe there's somebody that's considering putting their kids in a sports program. Is there something that you could say to try and convince these people of not just the physical benefits of doing something like a soccer at school or netball at school, or sending your child to a judo class or a jiu-jitsu class? What is it? What are these unique benefits that you see developing in people over time?
It's a very interesting question. I think it's the biggest thing for me is the mental development, emotional development. When you play sports, you get put in various situations that you have to deal with, and there's a result, and the result is your feedback mechanism as to if you've been successful or not. And if you play sports, you get put in these situations often, be it in training, be it in competition. And I think people that played sports from a young age just has more experience in situations because they've been put in situations in training and competition that somebody that hasn't played sports wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to experience. So I think it's not a complicated thing. I think that you can basically divide sports into two aspects. So one is a team sport where there's a social aspect to that, and then individual sports. Both of them have elements of pressure, elements of learning, elements of testing. So you don't necessarily have to be a professional sportsman or a top performer, but you still get put in situations where you have to learn and you have to deal. that somebody that's not necessarily in those situations wouldn't get the opportunity to do. So I think it's not a complicated thing. I think it's actually quite simple, but you need the situations to teach you. The oftentimes I have a little call it a formula, where it's a 3-part formula that I say in every moment. I believe that everything is a moment. So in each moment there's 3 aspects at play. Even in this interview, there's 3 aspects at play. There's me and how I experience myself mentally, physically. Then there's the moment that we are experiencing, and then there's you. Now, in a situation like this, I can't control you. I can, to a certain extent, control the moment, and I can 100% control myself. When you look at sports, that's exactly that. If there's a little competition or a training environment, there will be you, that moment, and the person on the other side, and you need to learn how to deal with you, so that you become a constant and not a variable. You need to be able to learn how to control situations and how to affect outcomes, and then be okay with the fact that somebody on the other side that I'm playing against or in a meeting with, or whatever the case might be, the situation might be, I can't control them, and I need to be okay with that. So how do you deal with that? And that's the type of learnings and teachings that I feel that that somebody would get when they participate in sport. Obviously, if you have a coach or somebody that can guide you through the process. But I think there's a massive benefit just because of the amount of situations you get put in.
You just hacked my mind a little bit because I asked you a somewhat vague and odd question, and you gave me a remarkably and spectacularly concise and accurate answer. And I think that kind of is a little bit of an insight into the window of a teacher. I realized afterwards that my question had waffled a little bit, but you still got right down to the heart of the question. And I think that is an absolutely amazing soundbite. I'm definitely going to ask Jamie, the editor, to edit that into its own little soundbite segment, because that is just a beautifully simplified explanation of the dynamics that we find ourselves in all the time.
Daily.
That leads us into the next question, funny enough, but I would like to just pause for a moment, because we've spoken about the benefits of sports, participating in sports at all different levels, all different ages of life, etc., but I would like to just say that most people, the vast majority of the world, are never going to be able to see what happens cage side in MMA. And I don't think most people understand just how high the level of risk in an environment is, just how difficult that job is, how undercompensated people are in that kind of role. And if there's something that you would like to say to the world from your experience as a coach cage side, as somebody that has experience in combat, that viewers don't understand, they don't see when they're watching UFC at home, is there an aspect that you'd like to say to people that would give them an increased appreciation of the sport, an increased appreciation of what happens in the background, that they just aren't going to see, things that are almost behind the stage?
It's an interesting question, and I need to really think about how I want to answer that, because on the one side, the reality of professional sports, let's rather say this, the reality of professional sports is that injuries are part of the game, and the stresses of, it being a profession, similar to the stresses that a CEO might experience, and high-end managers and business owners and whatever, those pressures are really real. And whilst managing those pressures, you still need to manage your personal life and all of that stuff. But so on the mental level, there's quite a lot to talk about. I think on the physical level, the injuries is one of the biggest things. The risk of injury in training, just to make it to an event, is a massive thing that I don't think a lot of people understand what athletes go through to just make the event. And oftentimes, what the percentage of athletes are that are competing with injuries. And I think there's something there that a lot of people would maybe find interesting and maybe get a fright if they really know what's going on and what people are putting their bodies through to achieve performance. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I think people aren't aware of. The actual mental pressures. I think I don't discern between stresses if it's physical or mental. I think a CEO would experience the same, and going into a massive business meeting would experience similar things to what fighters might experience when they fight. So I think people are just not aware how similar it is. But I think that's kind of one of the major things at the moment, I would say.
Are there any mental aspects or psychological qualities that you find across the board in successful fighters or in successful professional athletes as a whole? Or maybe you would want to extend that to successful professional business people or something like that. If there's kind of common sets of attributes or any kind of common thing that you find over and over again that keeps coming up.
I think it's 100% the same. I think the expression, the mental aspect, because I look at things from a mental side, I think the mental aspect of sports, professional sports, and business is exactly the same. I think the expression, therein lies the difference. In a business meeting, I would have a certain amount of self-control that's needed, emotional, intellectual control. I need strategy and tactics exactly the same as in professional sports. I think the expression there in a meeting would be intellectual, where on a sports field the expression will be physical. But that's the only difference. But there's no other difference in the pressures that are experienced, in the tactics. I think there's so many similarities, even in warfare. The strategy and tactics in warfare and professional sport, very similar. The strategy and tactics from sports to business, the same. Warfare to business, the same. I mean, there's a reason why the art of war and Sun Tzu and all these guys are used in business context. And similarly in sports, I really enjoy the art of war. I really enjoy Musashi's Book of Five Rings. The strategy that comes out of that mindset is relevant everywhere.
I definitely would agree with you, and I would also say that your curriculum in that sense is also somewhat adaptable to the corporate and business environment. And I think that some corporates and businesses would do incredibly well to start tapping into resources. There are things about performance psychology that guys like you and Rassi Erasmus and other Desiree Ellis, very high-level sports coaches will understand that, frankly, and I come from an academic environment, that, frankly, most professors, most PhDs, they simply will never understand. There is a lived reality gap that I've often experienced in motivational speakers and these strange programs and corporate enrichment things that go on in various businesses and organizations. And I think that most big organizations in South Africa would do incredibly well to start reaching out to high-performance sports coaches and to start tapping into their body of knowledge and start making high-performance corporate and business teams. We often have a very old-fashioned mentality around performance in business environments, and I just think your model would be adaptable, highly adaptable, and that your curriculum would be very beneficial to organizations.
Yeah, thank you. No, I agree. It's a very exciting avenue that I would love to explore.
Yeah, there's I think in the past there's been a rigidity of especially business schools protecting their kin and that kind of thing. But I think that businesses are becoming more dynamic about this kind of thing. And in the future, they will be sports coaches and psychologists with experience in mental performance and that kind of thing are going to become increasingly more valuable. And to some extent, in my opinion, they're already more valuable than most business coaches and most what they call, professional business coaches. I think a lot of them just don't have as much to offer as most professional sports coaches. And honestly, it's quite a pity. So I would like to see that kind of thing be more prevalent in South African tertiary environments in the future, tertiary and business environments. We're going to have to start heading to a part of the show that could certainly lose me one or two friends. And the idea is that there is an illusion that most people have between martial arts, the industry of self-defense, and combat sports. I taught self-defense and charged people money for a number of years, and I honestly think that most self-defense coaches have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Most of them wouldn't survive more than 2 or 3 minutes in any kind of real combat environment with an even moderately trained traditional combative. And I think there is an industry in South Africa, a fake and false industry that goes around selling people what I call psychological teddy bears. So as an example, somebody will take my mom, 70 years old, diabetic, bless her, tiny bit overweight, and they're going to now teach her a Krav course or whatever it is, and they're saying to my mom, she's got to do the eye gouge, and then she's got to duck and roll, and she must roll around, and she's got to do the wrist, and then the Aikido flip, and the illusions that these people have are, I think, just absolutely astounding. And I think that the people that aren't under illusions are just crooks. They're selling something that they themselves know won't work under pressure. And I think that there's a huge value in martial arts as well. Like, I think that karate is a fantastic martial art. Aikido is a fantastic martial art. You learn movement, you get fit, you make friends, you develop your mind, and there's a space for that in South Africa. But I have always wanted to illuminate the gap so that if there's people out there that are really looking into this kind of thing, to truly understand the gap and the levels of these kinds of things. I personally think that most people would be much better off being taught the principle of economics of self-defense, which is basically this. Your cell phone's worth 2,000 Rand. If you get stabbed and have to go to hospital, that's going to cost you a lot more than your cell phone's worth. Just hand over the cell phone and run. And I think that most people would do far better off just to understand that in 20 seconds than to do 100 hours of self-defense courses. Will you help me lose some friends?
I will. Look, I think there's a lovely word. I call it woo-woo. There's a lot of woo-woo out there when it comes to self-defense. And so I agree with you. I think you need to discern a few things when you look in the self-defense space. You need to understand that there's various types of violence. Jen and I speak about it often. You have sports, let's call it violence. You have military violence, and then you have criminal violence. And that's 3 distinct levels, and it's basically a step up each one, where martial arts and those things fall in the lowest rank. So we need to understand that when you're going to work with the criminal element, that they are at the highest level of violence. So, in my opinion, if you don't do something where you can actually test it, firstly, against a resisting person, and at a very intense level for those higher levels of violence, that's woo-woo, and you're setting yourself up for failure. and it is a teddy bear because you think you're okay until the moment comes that you need to do something, and you're gonna land yourself in big trouble. So from a martial arts aspect, I think the discipline, the learnings in the physical side of it, and understanding what the potential threats can be, specifically unarmed combat. There's certain martial arts that definitely stand out above the rest. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one, wrestling, judo, boxing, mixed martial arts, all of these, call it martial arts, is testable. I can train, I have a resisting opponent, and I will see, like in Jiu-Jitsu, I'm going to try and take you to the ground. I'm going to try and break your arm or choke you. You're obviously going to tap and not let that happen, but I can actually test it and pressure test it on a live resisting person. And then within that, our intentions changing, our physicality changing, we can up the levels as we go, and in terms of how difficult the situation can become. There's definitely another aspect where weapons are involved, and unarmed combat against weapons is just stupid. So people will say, yes, I'm going to do this, gun disarm, this knife disarm. I'm fortunate, my friend Ian, ex-Special Forces, a knife fighter, we've tested my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against him. There's a amazing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner in his own right, but where he carries a knife, a replica of a knife, and the concept was, I'm going to try and control him and try and subdue him and whatever, and he's going to try and access his knife and cut me. And I promise you, for about 45 minutes, he cut me to pieces. Stabbed me, cut me. There was no way that I could, until I started learning how to kind of manage. And what we found out, and we tested it, we wanted to see. And what I started figuring out was, if I knew he had a weapon, I had a better chance. If I didn't know he had a weapon, I had no chance. Okay, because at any point when that thing comes out and you get cut, you've got serious problems. And we played these little games, and it's just absolutely silly for people to think that I'm going to do a course, whatever the name of the course is, to learn gun disarms and knife disarms, unarmed combat against weapons. That's silly. You need to discern against unarmed and armed, and you need to have a strategy for both and skills in both. And the best self-defense skill of all is to have a recognition skill of trouble before trouble's knocking at your door, and find an escape. And I often find that people get into a comfort zone of, I'm doing self-defense and therefore I'll rather stand my ground. That's the last thing. If you talk to people that have real experience in these types of things, they're the first people that will turn around, walk away, have, so let's call it the clear economics that you speak about. There's a smarter way to do things. Oftentimes these other things come out of ego more than anything, and that becomes dangerous. But I agree, there's a bunch of programs and stuff out there that is really not worth the money.
I don't just think they're not worth the money. I think they actually put people in increased risk because they help egg the illusion on.
Yeah,
and it's a very, very dangerous space to be. There's just 2 points that I would like to add to that. First of all, my belief is that there's no way you're ever going to learn to be any kind of effective combatant in any kind of short course program. If you want to learn to fight, pick a martial art. If it has to be something like karate, at least make it Kyokushin karate, where it's the more physical, more legitimate kind of karate. Full contact. Testable, like you say.
Yes.
And or pick Greco-Roman wrestling or boxing even, and just do that for 6 months or a year. And you will be more dangerous than any self-defense coach out there almost in its entirety.
I think logically speaking, I mean, it's doing a self-defense course for a weekend, I would compare that to me wanting to lose weight or become stronger and doing 5 hours in the gym over the weekend and think that this is now going to carry me for the next year, 10 years. It's just silly. You can't do that. If I want to be good or if I want to have a strong body, I need to go to the gym and I need to lift regularly. If I want to be decent in a skill, I need to do it regularly. So there's no point in doing short courses for its movement. Fighting is and self-defense is movement. Movement needs to be practiced consistently. And then there's a point where muscle memory and things like that will come into play. It's a whole different conversation, but essentially it's movement, it's skill. Skills need to be developed over time and in different situations. You can't do that over a weekend.
I'm prepared to invite any self-defense instructor in the whole country around to our little combat lab, if I could call it that, and let them try out their disarms. The instructors, I'm not talking about the students, let the instructors come and try their disarms out. We can use rubber weapons and rubber knives and that kind of thing, and they're going to end up dead every single time. I can pretty much guarantee it. And the last illusion is for women. This thing of size doesn't matter. As a fairly small guy that spars with fairly large guys, often, let me tell you, size matters.
Yes.
And the physical comparison, or the physical difference between a male and a female, is so drastic that I think it's almost criminal as an instructor to not make people aware of this. So I've had instructors that have made me aware of this as a smaller guy, and I've made other people aware that your little self-defense course, when you weigh 50 or 60 kilos and the guy attacking you is 100 kilos, it's an illusion. You're buying yourself an illusion, and I think it's actually in some ways criminal in South Africa.
Definitely. I think I've had the opportunity to work and do a few self-defense courses for women, where I was asked to do stuff like that, and I think I did it 3 times now. And every time starts with recognition skills, and every time I walked away from a course, I felt that this is not what. I don't know. I think there's conceptually a really big problem with self-defense in general, and with women's safety, where we need to understand that they're structurally smaller than predominantly most males, and how to keep structure properly, how to escape, how to get up from a grounded situation, how to improve recognition skills. Those are the skills that if you do a course that you would do, you would incorporate. But even that needs to be practiced over time. So I don't know. I think I feel sorry for women in South Africa. I really do. I think our crime stats shows that's a massive issue, and a lot of the stuff that are out there for them is more to their detriment than
definitely. It just
safety.
Puts them at more at risk. It's not just like selling a teddy bear to a child, where the teddy bear is not going to protect that child at all, makes the child feel more comfortable. It's like selling a glass hammer, where they think that they might have a big hit, and they're going to be in deep trouble before they realize that the hammer's not going to survive. You've had an incredible run of success in South African MMA. There was a first wave of coaches and MMA fighters in South Africa that kind of came before you. The fantastic Chris Bright is one of those people. Yeah. And you are the second wave of coaches to come up, and you have had an incredible rise, along with a bunch of athletes, guys like Dricus, guys like Gareth McClellan, Soldier Boy, as he's more affectionately known. And I was wondering if you could talk us through some of these processes, what it was like to start in South Africa at Fight Fit Malaysia, which was at the time South Africa's most premier gym. In my opinion, it's now CIT. And it was a tiny little dungeon that they were essentially training in down at the bottom. It was a tiny little padded room. And maybe if you could share some highlights of your story going from that padded little room where it was kind of just a few people doing their own thing to being on the world stage at the UFC for the first time with Gareth.
Yeah, I think I got involved roughly about 2010 with the MMA, from a coaching perspective, specifically the grappling side. And yeah, I think the sport was still very young and new, and the thought process at that stage, if you look at mixed martial arts, we took it apart and said, okay, what are the aspects? So there was striking, wrestling, grappling, and we had multiple sessions and training all these aspects, and we had an increasing number of athletes that came from all over the country that joined Fight Fit Malaysia at that stage. And it was interesting because we were pioneering. We were trying to figure out how to put all these aspects of fighting together. And at that stage, when we started out, we were doing well. I think we had good athletes at the time, and the guys were all kind of shaping each other and whatnot. Very fortunate with producing quite a few champions out of the gym. UFC champions, then having Gareth go to the UFC, being the first South African to go into the UFC, and that was a massive milestone for him, for me, for us as a team at the time. And then I moved on. At the moment, I'm with Team CIT. I've been for a while. Work with Dricus and Cameron, and very fortunate, amazing athletes, the whole team, amazing coach Morne Visser, amazing coach. So, and now, walking the Gareth was the first guy to win, a South African to win a fight in the UFC. That was amazing. Now having Dricus and Cameron, win fights in the UFC, consecutive fights in the UFC, that was another first. And then Dricus going all the way and becoming UFC champion, it's just amazing. So the whole sport has changed and the landscape has changed. And MMA is still fairly new, so it's evolving. And I said in the beginning, we were training elements. Right now, we're looking at integrating these aspects. And the highest level and the new breed, the next generation that's coming through, are integrated fighters that can seamlessly switch between striking and wrestling and grappling on the ground and back all the way to striking again. And that's kind of where we're evolving to. But it's been a long process and learning, a lot of learning, because it's new and it's new for everybody, and there's a lot of pioneering. But it's been pioneering on the coaching side and pioneering on the athlete side because the sport's new.
I think that MMA has a very important place in South Africa's economy, in South Africa's professional sports environment. Historically speaking, combat sports have been one of the upward social mobility tools of disadvantaged or poor or disenfranchised people. I had a grandfather who lifted my family out of poverty, believe it or not, for the first time as a boxer. He was a professional boxer, and he made enough money that our family could get educated, and that was an amazing thing for us. So I've even experienced that in my own family. And there was a time in South Africa when MMA was booming. Because I'm looking at it now purely from an industry analysis perspective, I'm going to try and divorce myself of my emotional attachment to sports. And when I looked at the industry back in around 2011, 2012, all the way through to 15, 16 even, the industry was booming to such an extent in South Africa. There were gyms opening up all the time, more and more coaches on the market available, there was more professional fights happening, there was a growth in amateur sports, and all of this was creating jobs, it was creating advertising space, there was companies that could sell equipment, it was really good. And at that stage, I guess I was fairly naive. I expected that South African MMA would continue to boom through the roof forever, and eventually one day we would just end up like UFC here in South Africa, though. And that did not happen. In my opinion, the South African MMA industry actually failed to some extent. It went through a boom phase, and the bubble actually collapsed. And it collapsed, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. First of all, I think that there was an absence of proper industry leadership, what I call captains of industry. In cycling, there is a fantastic guy, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. His name's Douglas Ryder. He was a professional cyclist with the most amazing charisma and the most amazing personality you've ever met. Very, very smart guy, very, very dialed in. Has an incredibly intelligent father-in-law that they're quite close to, and his father-in-law was a captain of industry in business. And what Douglas was able to do is he was the first professional athlete that I knew of in South Africa anyway. There were other captains of industry like Basil Cohn who came before him. It's a side story. And what Doug did is he managed to transition from being an elite top athlete to being an elite top captain of industry. And he completely transformed cycling in South Africa, in my opinion. He has lifted up so many people behind him that it is just the most incredible thing. I would recommend to absolutely anybody out there to go and Google Doug Ryder and have a look at his story. I'm surprised there isn't a book out about this guy. And MMA needs a Douglas Ryder. That is what we need. The industry went, it did so well. The bubble popped around sort of 2015, 2016, 2017. We simply are not in the space now that we were several years ago. And yesterday, or the day before, one of the top honchos from Boxing South Africa was assassinated. Boxing SA is in an absolute dire crisis. It is rudderless, it is leaderless, and it honestly isn't in good shape. And the people that are going to lose out on this are the people that need a hand up in life, that need opportunities, and that need support from South African government institutions and from the public alike, from civil society alike. And I just want to talk about whether or not you see similarities or see some of the things that I've seen in the industry, and how we could potentially avoid some of the pitfalls that, for example, Boxing South Africa is having right now. How can MMA in South Africa continue to be a bastion of the upliftment of young athletes, as opposed to either booming and popping again or falling into complete disarray with the likes of Boxing South Africa? Do we have a Douglas Ryder on the horizons? Do you see a way for the current leaders of the industry to get together and say, we are not going to get government support because you're not? We just know that's not going to happen. I don't think MMA SA is a very high-functioning organization, if I can be completely honest. Certainly not if you measure it against other sports fraternities in South Africa. And I would like to know what can be done by business leaders out there, by captains of industry, by guys that are professional fighters now, or coaches that are looking to transition, that are looking to lead businesses. What can we do to avoid these pitfalls?
I think I want to start the beginning. Let's ask the question, what would lift somebody out of poverty? It's money. Money needs to exchange hands from all the relevant parties involved. Yes, possibly government's not going to give money to sponsor, or to develop the sport in the country or the system. Maybe they do. If they do, thank you very much, but I doubt that that's going to happen. So who else does South Africa normally look to when things like that happen? They look to business. So for businesses to invest, they would give money, but they need to give money into a system where the money can flow seamlessly to organizations, fighters, coaches, people involved, be it then referees and staff and all of that stuff, but money needs to move through without a bottleneck. And that's the only way that upliftment would happen. And unfortunately, if you look at the MMA space in South Africa, what do fighters earn at the moment? That's it's shocking. It shouldn't be like that.
I mean, you've got guys that are taking on full professional rounds with trained killers for, I'm talking at the professional level, boxing South Africa and MMA, 2,000 Rand, 3,000 Rand, 4,000 Rand. People would be shocked. And I think that is a point I actually want to get on the show now. That we have guys that are fighting for a living. They can fight at most 3 or 4 times a year because of the injuries and the training camps and the amount of coaching needed. And some of these guys are earning as little as 2, 3, 4, 5,000 Rand professional fight. These are not professional athletes. For me, what makes a professional athlete is not the contract you've signed. It's whether or not you've got the time, the resources, and the money to live like a professional athlete so that you can perform like one. Sorry to interrupt me.
No. That's 100% correct. I think, to change it, we need a system. If you look at sports in South Africa, let's look at sports that are successful. There's 2 sports that I've always looked towards. One is golf, and I look at the 2 because they're completely different sports. So one is golf. We have a golf system where we consistently have golfers come through and play on the PGA Tour, play on the European Tour, whatever. So golf is one. Rugby is another one. Where there's structures, we have guys that are, performing, winning World Cups and can make a living off of those sports. Then there's a lot of sports in South Africa that you can't make a living off of, and it's a hobbyist approach to a professional career. Coaching often is exactly the same. So there's a broken system in there that needs to be fixed, and it needs to be run like an organization or a business. And in that business, each element that makes up the business needs to be compensated and needs to be looked after. But you need to go on a structural level and have a look at what would make a system function sufficiently. And like you said, there's some thinking involved in that and some business brains that need to come together, because where we are at the moment, I don't think, the solution to any of these, call it sports, MMA being one of them, is just to put money in, because the money is not going to go to the right people and places. So we're not going to have upliftment. We need to create a system where we can actually uplift and develop fighters and coaches, because fighting specifically, MMA and boxing, you can only fight three times a year if you're lucky and you're not injured. You can, it's detrimental to try and fight more than that. And like you said, at the numbers you're talking about, it's impossible to create a living like that. So on the other side of your question, is there a Douglas rider? I feel there are, but certain conversations need to be had. Do we have one at the helm at the moment? No, definitely not.
Yeah, there's got to, obviously there's not one at the moment, but one on the horizon in the next couple of years. I think it's essential to secure one of those for the future of the industry.
Yes, definitely. But I think we need to go sit and look at the at various models and see what the best model is going to be to take combat sports forward in the country, due to the fact that you can only participate or compete a certain amount of times a year with injuries and all of that, and just safety in general. So, what is, if the system is set up correctly, where fighters earn a salary monthly, and they can train and they can develop, and then they have their fights, and those purses can be dispersed or used or whatever, however you manage that. There's multiple models that you can look at, but something like that needs to be implemented. But that's on a fighting level. There's obviously organizational things that conversations that need to be had, but all of that will filter into a larger system, I believe.
I just had to laugh at Dricus making a comment that South Africa is the worst country in the world. First of all, I don't think it is the worst country in the world. We're right up there. I agree with him. But I would argue that maybe Iran's a little bit worse. But it's somewhat funny that Dricus is now a far more respected political analyst than I am. The irony is not lost on me. But to go back and to maybe illuminate how I interpret Dricus's comment. I know other Dricuses in other sporting codes, including running, rowing, Olympic rowing, cycling, a few. And these guys get absolutely no support from the government. It is completely laughable. The first time any of these guys ever see a representative from the government is for the photo op when they've won a big prize. I honestly don't think that the Minister of Sports could tell Dricus Du Plessis apart from Cameron Simon, apart from my sister. And just know that the first time any of these guys start to get airtime, they're going to be there with their ANC T-shirts and their whatever colored berets, red or green or yellow. And these people across the board can't get help. I've heard a professional guy who's been to the Olympics a couple of times for rowing thank his parents in the sponsorship segment of a talk show because he had no sponsors and he'd been to the Olympics twice and his parents were paying for a lot of it. And I think it's really important for people to understand that guys like him and other athletes around the country are getting next to no support until it's time for the photo op. And that is maybe to some extent feeding the negative relationship that a lot of professional athletes have with proudly South Africa as a brand. I know that it's not the same for rugby and cricket. They get a lot of widespread organizational and institutional support. Even that, in cricket, it's a little bit odd. But if you could also just maybe share a few words on how little support these guys get and to feed back into what you said about needing corporate or businesses to come on board, to have a long-term vision, to say, I'm going to help make a new Dricus Du Plessis from someone who's 18 now, and we're going to look after this guy for 5 or 6 years on a long-term contract. That is the kind of vision that we need, and from government, you're simply not going to get it. It's not coming in almost any of the sporting codes.
Yeah, look, I think the reality is there's no support from government. That is true. I think they've got so much stuff going on that they need to give support to because of failing structures in general that through all sectors that's probably the last place that they would look to put money in. So the only way that there's two things. One, we need business support definitely to get our sports going and athletes going. Secondly, we need to start looking at sports as a business. Dricus is a business. MMA is a business. And we need to start looking at creating businesses and business opportunities for other people to invest in, whether it be a long-term benefit. Those are the type of structures and systems I was talking about before. But I think to wait for government or ask for help, you're on a little rowboat in the ocean and nobody's going to hear you. So that I think is a pipe dream.
Yeah, it's why I advocate for the leaders of the industry, the most senior guys, to get together, have an industry meeting, say how can we get feeder systems going, how can we get a more engagement, how can we stop cannibalizing each other's students, each other's fighters, each other's sponsors, because that's a huge problem at the moment in South Africa. The industry is all fighting over the same small little pie rather than helping each other to grow the pie bigger so they can all share a bigger pie. I think that should really be one of the goals of the combat sports industry, and the government should be more interested in this kind of thing because this is employment. So when we talk about growing the industry, how the government should be hearing it is we're talking about growing employment.
Yeah, I agree. I also think there's a lot of benefits, like we said in the beginning of the show, there's a lot of benefits in sports for youngsters. This is a way to give people direction. This is a way to lift communities and people up. And there's the physical elements, the mental elements, the discipline elements. So it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor for them to look at. But I think in like you said, people need to get together, and somebody has to put their hand up and start directing the boat, and maybe I think probably build a boat, and then captain it. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think the amazing thing with Dricus is that he achieved what he has achieved, becoming a world champion. It's the highest that you can go, and from here, where do you go? It's a question of how many times can I defend the belt, maybe a different weight division or whatever the case might be. But I mean, he achieved the pinnacle of the sport from this situation, as it is in South Africa, with a lot of people having to do it almost as a hobby. And I always said that South Africa, our South African people, across the board, has world potential and talent. In sports specifically, we are definitely a nation that can achieve amazing things. But in all sports, if you go look at the sports where we do well, it's where there's good structures, good coaching, good leadership, and that's where development happens. So, but I think as a nation and talent, we've got, and specifically in fighting, I mean, we have a culture that's groomed for being good, MMA fighters and fighters in general, boxers. That's why we do well in rugby. We're physical, and I think that and intellectually smart. So we can definitely stand our own and be. Dricus has shown for a lot of people that we can be. It's possible to be a world champion, but probably leading into something different. But Dricus being at the top, we need to have a feeder system of guys coming in behind him that will take over that position in years to come. And that's why it's important to put things in place now. He's flying the flag and showing what's possible, but I think the next 5 years, 10 years is going to be telling if somebody else is going to be able to also follow in those footsteps.
Dricus is a business. I definitely agree with that. Or at this stage of his career, he's now given his economic clout. He has now transformed into one. And I don't get involved in MMA fanfare at all. I don't like the hype and the, let's call it the stagery of MMA. I prefer just to watch the combative aspects of it. But he had that little spat with Adesanya about being the first African and this and that. And I just want to say, from a business analyst's perspective, from my perspective, what Dricus did was incredible, because we are one of the most difficult countries in the world to start a business in. Believe it or not, measurably. I could phone Adrian Saville right now; he would back me up. I'm not sure exactly how far up or down that order we are, but one of the most difficult countries in the world. And he started and made himself into a business in this environment as a South African, as an all South African. He used South African coaches, he used South African sponsors, he used South African fans, he used South African infrastructure, and he made himself into a business. It is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And while he might not be the first African title holder or whatever it is, he certainly is the first African businessman to achieve what he achieved in combat sports, and you can't take that away from him. So from a business perspective, I have a huge amount of respect for Dricus. His abilities to perform as an athlete aside, that's quite remarkable. And that is the kind of thought that we need. We need people that are looking at our ecosystem locally and saying, what can we do with our ecosystem within the environment that we're in currently?
I agree.
He's done fantastically well. We're coming down to the end of the show. There's not too much time left, so we're down to just a few last questions. This one fits in quite nicely. I mean, we've obviously got guys like Cam, DeMart, Mark Hulme's doing incredibly well. And we have guys that are performing at the highest level in the world. BK is also up there somewhere at one of the big organizations. Congratulations to him. BK Musanyani, fantastic. What is next for these guys? Because I've heard coaches speak before and say that they're worried about the feeder system, about the gap between the top guys performing and the next run of guys coming up. Is there anything that you'd like to say about that maybe the public might want to be aware of so that they could somehow facilitate or help or illuminate somehow in the industry?
I think these guys that are flying the flag in multiple organizations, Dricus gave me, like you said, BK in one championship, DeMart Benine, Aries, all these guys, they all need support. They need guys around them. They need training partners. They need obviously financial support to get there. That's like the major factor. I mean, they need to eat. They need to travel to get to sessions and whatever to do what they need to do. They've got medical expenses. The training is obviously difficult on their bodies and all that stuff. So, financial support's a big thing. From the athlete's perspective, aside from that, all these athletes have groups of people around them that support them, coaches and training partners, to help them to perform at that level. That person being at the top doing their thing is one of a team of people underneath him, around him, that's enabling him to perform where they are performing. It's not a standalone thing. It's not something that you can achieve on your own. So there's multiple things to take into account, but those are two of the main things. I think financial support and then support for the teams and stuff around these guys that are flying the flag. That's important. The
coaches and the top athletes in the industry are, by any benchmark, way underpaid. They, to some extent, it's kind of just daylight robbery. You will have somebody like DeMart Penner. He's performing at the highest level in the world. He's a spectacularly experienced athlete, a wonderful person. And what happens is people will say to somebody like DeMart, no, if you want to subsidize your living, you need to coach some children. I mean, it's absolutely insane. This guy's performing at the highest level in the world. It would be like going to Bongi and Bonambi and saying, look, Bongi, we know you're playing for the Springboks. You do a fantastic job, but you're going to have to go coach primary school soccer on a Tuesday afternoon to help subsidize your living. And Rassi, if you don't mind, you're going to have to go coach B-team rugby at the local high school so that you can subsidize your living. I think it's just the most insane thing. And if people could understand how underpaid professional fighters are, especially our local guys and our athletes, and to understand how much opportunity there is for business and corporate South Africa to not just get involved, but to benefit directly from these guys. Yeah. I mean, to get somebody like you out or Mornay Visser out to do a tailored talk to a business on a Friday afternoon. What a fantastic thing to be able to give your athletes, to invite somebody like DeMart with you, maybe out to a business to give a motivational talk. What an unbelievably fantastic opportunity. And that you guys are not more monetized is frankly shocking to me.
Definitely. I think that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of creating better systems where it's easier for business to get involved with us and for us to get involved with business, and find a symbiotic relationship there, where two mutually beneficial relationships where from our perspective and as coaches and fighters, that we benefit, and then at the same time that the business that's supporting our business will benefit on their side. I think there's some conversations that need to be had, but there are definitely guys that at the moment that are involved, and that we need to say thank you very much for the guys that have put up their hand currently, and invite other guys to other businesses to have conversations and see if there's mutually beneficial relationships that can be formed.
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that there are some amazing little synergies and ecosystems that can be forged between the South African combat industry, being MMA primarily at the moment, which is the new emerging one, a little bit of boxing, even though it's in chaos, and to create mutually beneficial ecosystems. There's no doubt that that's possible, no doubt that all parties can benefit. Government's not going to step in, and it's very, very important for the industry role players, and for captains of industry and business at large to start having conversations with each other. It just starts with a conversation. So if you're out there and you're interested in some of the benefits of tapping into some of the high-performance knowledge of guys like Niel Geyser, people like Morne Visser, athletes like Dricus or Cameron, get in contact with these guys. They're already working in these spaces. They're already starting to do some things that will be absolutely amazing for all stakeholders and beneficiaries going forward. And reach out to these guys, contact them, speak to your local fighters and your local gyms, and see if there's a way that you can somehow support and help nurture this industry, because jobs are on the line. Social upward mobility for peoples and family are on the line, and it's just truly a fantastic opportunity.
Definitely.
Before we round out, I was wondering if there's anybody that would like to get hold of you for coaching programs or for corporate engagements or that kind of thing, where they can find you on social media or how to contact you.
Social media, I've got an Instagram page, Niel, Niel _Geyser. You can find me through Instagram and the DMs there. I've got a website. You can also type my name, nielgeyser.com, and I've got a gym, Yukutatsu, bjj.co.za. You can find all my contact details on there, so anybody's welcome. If they want to, they can find me there.
I just want to thank you, Niel, a fantastic performance psychologist of sorts, not formally qualified, but a performance psychologist of sorts, an incredible sports coach, a man with a million mind hacks. He has black belts in judo and jiu-jitsu. He's got a couple of amazing little businesses that are up and running. And I would just like to thank you for coming on the show, for offering us up your time, your 25 plus years of expertise, and just say, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you for being here, and we really look forward to having you again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a lovely conversation.
I'm Aidan Brown. This is Niel Geyser. Thank you to Benny Matjiu and our special advisor guest today, Arlu. Wishing you guys a great day ahead. Bye for now.